All right, welcome back. We are going to go ahead and finish up our watercolor trees today. So what that means is I've got one peeled here, and you guys might be at different points at this. I'm also going to peel this one. I went ahead and peeled that other one before I turned on the TV. I almost forgot about this guy, but save a little bit of time. So we want to peel our last two trees. And you can see why now we've wanted to keep each layer so nice and light. And hopefully you guys have done your sketchbook for the 13th or 14th where we practiced our detail paintings. If not, you guys can find that on the Canvas site or on YouTube. And it's called Detail Trees in Watercolor. So we're just going to paint over with water our next two trees, and I'm using a pretty narrow flat brush here. I was using a detail brush for my very back trees. As they come forward, I can use a little bit more color. Now, some of you have asked who have been remote if you need to use these tubes and watercolors. You've said you don't have them. It's totally fine just to use the brown and yellow. In your kit, we can always just use what we have. There's absolutely, sometimes the most beautiful things are made with the most simple materials. So don't feel like you can't complete this project if you don't have that yellow ochre or burnt sienna. Now as I put these colors in, they're going to bleed, which is exactly what I want. I want that textural look. So that's why I wet the branches before I put these colors in, and I kind of go ahead and layer them from light to dark. Hope you guys are doing well this morning. It's a stressful time for everyone, and what better way to deal with stress and anxiety than by getting our paints out and just getting our minds into our creative self. So again, I encourage you to use whatever resources you have in your own home to do this project and not worry about supplies as much as just technique. I'm also going to use just plain water and pull some of these colors around to make this shadow on what I've decided is kind of the darker side of my birch tree here. As always, I really appreciate your patience and just staying with me during these. You can see I'm kind of extending these branches a little bit just by using some of that brown paint and creating some of these thinner lines. I'm going to need to move to a detail brush, but sometimes it just helps to outline the branches just a little bit. I might even come in here a little more, grab some of those, and I'm going to grab my detail brush now, just like we practiced yesterday, and get some thicker paint on this. Again, experimenting a little bit down here on my bigger branches first, and just kind of pulling out some of these branches. Remember, they can overlap the trees in the back. Overlapping is a really important part, and remember that our branches on our birch trees tend to angle up, and they can come from the middle of the tree here too. That's something we don't want to forget, that branches come from all parts of our trees, not just the sides, which can sometimes be overlooked when we're just drawing from our memory, which is kind of what we're doing, although I hope that you really did go out and kind of look at some of those birch trees before you started this project. So I'm just going to try and unite everything by either darkening or lightening some areas, and I'll let that dry for a little bit before I add my black. I also might add a little bit of grasses, probably more in my yellow ochre here on the bottom. And I know our trees here are definitely looking a little less colorful than these now. They are looking pretty dead, but when we started this, um, you know, they were looking pretty awesome, pretty fall-esque. So I'm gonna switch back, water off this brush, move into my last tree here, and paint him in with some water. This is my one tree that goes top to bottom, and I'm gonna go ahead and use that yellow ochre. And I'm gonna kind of mix it with some burnt umber, get that in there too. Now as our trees get wider, we can also kind of move to the middle with some of these. I know on the smaller ones in the back, I kept these kind of off to the sides and real light. But now as we move in closer, it's okay to kind of get those stripes a little more, a little longer. And I'm just gonna shade in these branches a little more on these forward trees than I did on the background trees. I think that's a little more realistic when I actually look at trees. Again, I'm going to get in this shadow. And remember, you can always pull a shadow in just by adding water and pulling out with your brush a little bit. And I just have to tell you guys again how impressed I am with the work that you've done on these and the care that you've put into it. Learning how to paint in layers takes a lot of patience, especially because it involves a lot of waiting time, a lot of waiting for your painting to dry. So I'm gonna just go in here and kind of finish up with some smaller branches. Still, they're gonna start a little thinner at the end. I'll plug in some darker colors here. And I'm going to extend my branches because I never want my branches to just dead end at a stump. Although they do sometimes if the wind has hit them that fall season. I just want to check to make sure that, you know, I've got some realistic looking branches here, that they are getting bigger as they go towards the base of the tree. And I'm just going to darken up this front tree as I go. Now that hopefully these two trees are drying out a little bit, I can go back in with the black paint out of my palette, and I might put a little bit of black areas in on some of these as well. The black in my watercolor palette isn't a very strong black, but that's actually okay for this project. You have to be very careful with black and watercolor that it doesn't get too strong, too harsh, especially in you know, in a watercolor like this. We just want to keep it looking light, you know, like a deep fall color, but with the layers that we've been talking about. We just want to be, you know, we want to preserve the kind of the depth of our picture by not taking away from our back layers with a really harsh foreground layer. So just, you know, I definitely want to leave a little bit of white in these trunks because that is what really adds life to our picture. Remember, is the white area on our paper that we leave open to the viewer. Accidentally got a really dark area here, which happens sometimes. So what I'm going to do is just add pure water and kind of try and work that in to the rest of the tree and out, so it's not quite so strong. Remember, if we feel like we've messed up or made a mistake, let's just take that and use it to add to our painting and you know, see what we can do with that. Okay, whew. So now that I'm looking, because in my camera I see this really glaring white area, so I think I'm just going to add a little more paint there. Okay, now not the very last step, but almost the last step, after I put in the black paint on my front tree. And I love how that remaining water in there just kind of takes that black on a little journey of, you know, the imperfections that we do see in our birch. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges you guys are going to learn as an artist is when to say you're done with a certain step or a certain project. So let's go ahead and do our final coat of splatter paint. This is going to be like the leaves that are on top of our closest trees. I might look for colors that maybe I don't have, or maybe I really like in there and want to see a little more of. Remember, we want to get a thick paint on a stiff brush, and we're just gonna do some reds and oranges because I feel like they just really contrast with my background color. So we'll get those on there. And maybe a little bit of violet. I've been really enjoying infusing some violet into my paintings as well. Okay, and remember, some of those leaves are going to fall onto the ground, so I might just do a little bit of splatter on my ground too under these trees. And then we get to do a little bit of detail painting on the ground level. Remember, we want to still keep this detail painting nice and light. We want to keep our perspective or our ratio true, which means if I'm going to do detail painting in the background, it needs to be itty bitty teeny, and it needs to be a little more, a little lighter, and a little more subtle. Whereas if I do detail painting in the foreground, maybe some grasses, those can be a little larger because we're seeing those in front of things. Keep in mind that lighter colors like that yellow are probably not going to show up super well. We want our foreground to always be a little darker than our background. My little signature that I like to put, well, I'll do that after we do, let's do a shrub like we kind of practiced in our sketchbooks today or yesterday. So we'll go ahead and just dance some little branches in here just by barely touching our brush to our paper. I'm going to use the rest of my burnt sienna here. And if I run out of that, I'm just going to use the brown straight from my watercolor palette, which is fine. I'm just using a Crayola 8 color here for the most part. You can do a lot with that. And then I'm going to wait for that to dry. While I wait, I might just grab my stippling brush and add a little more in my foreground just to separate it from my background. And my middle ground. And then over here on my shrub, I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of yellow paint and a little bit of green paint so that it's kind of a light green, yellow, fall-y color. And I'm going to put that on top of my shrub. And then I'm going to grab some red just to infuse in there, like rose hips or crabapple. Well, crab apples wouldn't be that low, but you get the idea. And then I have a little signature I like to do for these fall paintings. I like it to be pretty subtle. That means that it doesn't stand out a lot, but maybe a very observant viewer would see it. I like to make a little red-orange mushroom by one of my background trees, and I like to make him just itty-bitty, as itty-bitty as I can, and maybe even a little baby mushroom next to that one, because I love seeing those out in the forest. Those would actually be pretty big mushrooms, I think, in real life. I'll zoom in so you guys can see them over by that back tree. Right there. So now the really exciting part is zooming out. I get to take off, after everything is done, my masking tape, and I should have a really, be really careful when you rip that off though, because as you see I kind of tore a little corner off. I think I can fix that with a glue stick, but make sure you keep your fingers close to where you're peeling, because if we didn't pre-stick this tape enough, it will rip your watercolor paper. So now I have a final watercolor painting, and of course we always want to sign that in the bottom right hand corner. And congratulations on finishing.